G'day warbles on all at the YouTube with part 2 of the Cosmic Scoreboard effect. Now in part 1 I alluded to how people who've been doing bad things because they thought it was okay, they tend to be given free hits, penalty points on the Cosmic Scoreboard. They get away with it for years. One of the best examples I can think of is a politician in Queensland called Russell Hinds. And this Russell Hinds was a member of Joe Bjelke-Petersen's government. And Russell Hinds was the Minister for Roads and Racing, and Russell Hinds was the Minister, Minister for Roads, Minister for Racing. He was the largest gravel contractor in Queensland, blue metal and gravel making roads. He was also the largest racehorse stud owner. So he was charged with being the minister making the laws to regulate the two industries that he was personally making money in. Now we had a very sort of small scale version of that here in the Severn Shire. Many years ago, the story was if you wanted a good road, you had to marry one of the Donnelly clan, because Len Donnelly was the Shire president for 21 years or 27 years. Long time. And that's the start of the second 750ml bottle of Cooper's Stout. So Bike Messenger 7, Earl, and all the malt liquor people, this is another malt liquor video. So, where were we? We were talking about Cosmic Scoreboard effect. We were talking about how Russell Hinds was the Minister for Roads and the Minister for Racing. And he was the largest gravel contractor. And he was the owner of the largest racehorse stud in Queensland. And he got to the point where people had noticed that it was a little bit of a kind of corruption-inducing situation. And he was the sort of person who must have been hungry as a kid, because he was obese. And obese people overload their joints. And his knees had given up. And at about the time when his corruption investigation problems began, both his knees failed. And he was so overweight that his knee replacements failed. And he trapped himself in a wheelchair. And that meant he couldn't exercise, so he got even fatter. And this intensely hungry person who was pretty corrupt, like very selfish, probably from the best of motives, he couldn't retire because his successor would find all the crooked fingers he had in the crooked pies. So he stayed there, and then he developed bowel cancer. And in the immortal words of Douglas Adams, who died of a heart attack at age 42, when he said 42 was the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe and everything. In the immortal words of Douglas Adams, Russell Hinds died when his intestines rose up and strangled his brain. Hey? His bowel cancer grew cerebral metastases. Because his outlook on life was so shitty, he was growing a new arsehole in the middle of his frontal lobes. Right? That's karma, Cosmic Scoreboard effect, God's punishment. If you don't wake up to yourself and recognise that being selfish is the wrong path, regardless of how hardly done by you felt when you were a kid, your life's going to turn to shit and overwhelm you, and you'll be really sort of miserable at your end. And that's what happened to Russell Hinds. It's pretty much what happened to Hitler, and Stalin was not happy at his end either. I don't think Pol Pot was real pleased when he was, on his deathbed. If you want to beat Genghis Khan's kill rate because you're an angry, cranky, bitter, twisted person, and you were treated like shit as a kid, well, okay, you've probably got enough penalty points on the Cosmic Scoreboard that you will be able to get away with it for a while, but it gets increasingly difficult and it's a loser's game. Now, the other side of the cosmic scoreboard effect is that people tend to die when they're at their spiritual peak. If you've got nowhere to go that's uphill towards the light, if you're, for example, a true believing small town Catholic schoolgirl, and you come from a bright family and your parents push you academically and you do well enough to get into medicine, what hope have you of not going to medical school? And if you're about to come out of medical school with academic laurels, ducks of the class, but you're about to go into a system where you're going to work 12-hour shifts back to back and then have another 12 hours on call, so that you can work a maximum of 36 hours in casualty, looking at the dregs of a city of 4 million coming in through the doors, and all you're going to see is the junkies and the cutters. If you've got no experiences to look forward to but disillusionment, then maybe that's why when you're on your way home you fall asleep. 50 miles from home, 40 miles from home, and your car veers onto the wrong side of the road, and the fifth-year medical student who's just passed their exams with honours is taken off the playing board before they can be disillusioned by just how filthily corrupt the world is. I can remember an 8-year-old whose parents were undergoing a really traumatic separation. And all she had to look forward to was going through puberty in a house where both her parents were competing for sort of sexual point scoring to see who'd had the better time in the house that they were alternating in every 2 weeks, because the kids had custody of the house because the family court was just so brilliant in some of its decisions. And there was a car accident and the little kid died, and she was like 9 years old, 8 years old. The days on which her parents changed over at the house were so traumatic for her and her brother. They used to deliberately catch the wrong school bus and go 20 or 30 kilometres in the wrong direction and turn up at the house of the parents of a friend of theirs at school. And you think, well, gee, all that little girl had to go to look forward to was an absolute fairy tale childhood dissolving into puberty among sleazebags. And before anything bad could happen to her, she got taken off the playing board. When I look at my second cousin's son, the young police officer who was shot in the neck on a drug raid 2 weeks after he was promoted to the Middle Eastern Organised Crime Squad in Sydney, I think, well, he was 26, he'd done a university course, he was young and enthusiastic and idealistic, he'd done a year or so in the uniform branch, they put him in with the D's, and all he had to look forward to was seeing how corrupt our society really is. Maybe he saw something he shouldn't have seen, and maybe the forces of corruption killed him, but I don't think so. I think the bloke who killed him was in good faith, the senior detective sergeant, who swore out the warrant because the system told him that there was a drug dealer and he wanted a nice easy little drug deal, or drug warrant serving, to test the reactions of his wet behind the ears 26-year-old 2 weeks into the force recruit, or 2 weeks into the MEOX recruit. But life turned out differently, you know, like the address they were going to was not the address of a drug dealer, it was the address of a drug thief. The drug thief had borrowed a handgun, held up an actual drug dealer. The drug dealer had apparently fed information into the police system, whether it was via the Crime Stoppers anonymous telephone call or via a connection, I don't know. But a warrant was sworn out to search the house of the drug thief. And it was stipulated in the warrant that the drug thief was a drug dealer and the drug thief had no firearm. Both of those were wrong. The drug thief was not a drug dealer and the drug thief did have a firearm. So he's just gone through nearly all of the powder drug that he stole. He looks out the window and he sees 2 carloads of swarthy looking blokes in t-shirts and jeans jumping out of cars and running towards his front door, and they're all pulling firearms out of their back pockets. So he doesn't think this is the police. Oh no, the 56 or 58-year-old Mr. NG, who comes from Vietnam obviously and maybe has military training, he thinks this is the return match home invasion. So he goes and hides in the garage. My second cousin's son walks into the garage, you know, little 26-year-old, got his handgun out in front of him, doing everything exactly the way he's been told. As he walks in, the person who's hiding inside the garage, I suspect right beside the personal access door, that bloke fires a shot from over there. It hits my second cousin's son in the left arm. Now whether it hit his forearm or his upper arm, I don't know, but it hit his left arm. So his left arm drops away. He bravely fires off 3 shots from his right hand, and his muzzle flash goes visually out through the doorway and audibly out through the doorway, and the senior detective sergeant who was on the other side of the doorway, the guy who applied for the warrant and swore it out, the bloke in charge of the raid, he's on the other side of the doorway, and he hears one bang, one pistol discharge. He looks in the direction of the noise and he sees 3 muzzle flashes facing towards him and sounding towards him. So what does he do? He fires at the muzzle flash. And my 26-year-old second cousin's son copped a police bullet in his police neck and he died before sunrise. Now that was not an example of the wages of sin is death. It's an example of you die at your spiritual peak, and before being in the Middle Eastern organised crime squad could have corrupted him, Billy Cruz was taken off the playing board. As I said, I don't know how it's done, but we do live in a fair and just universe. Like it says in the Messiah's Handbook, the reminders for the advanced soul. And excerpts of that are in a book called Illusions, written by Richard Bach. Imagine the universe, beautiful and just and perfect. And then remember one thing. The is, the creator, the God theory, has already imagined it a great deal better than you. Go and look in Illusions. You'll find the excerpts from the Messiah's Handbook, Reminders for the Advanced Soul. Cosmic Scoreboard theory is one of my favourite ideas. Let's hope I've said all of that in less than 15 minutes. Ciao.